accept my share of the responsibility in the result of the elections.
If you look at race by race, it was close. The cumulative effect, however, was not too close. It was a thumping.
I'm not recommending for every future president that they take a shellacking like I did last night.
Hello, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barrett.
Hey, I'm Chaz Ciadello.
This week, the scandal that could cost Republicans the Senate. The anti-abortion candidate who allegedly told his partner to have one twice.
And we're going to be looking at two other major issues that could decide this election: rising crime rates and petrol prices. But first...
Since Joe Biden came to office, the United States Senate has been tied at 50-50. So his Democratic Party colleagues often need Vice President Kamala Harris as Senate President to cast the deciding vote. But if Democrats lose a single seat next month, they will slip into the minority, and Joe Biden's agenda will basically grind to a halt. There are 34 Senate spots being decided next month. Control of the chamber could well come down to just the single state of Georgia. And this week, that contest got very interesting indeed.
And Joe Biden, the apparent winner in Georgia.
Joe Biden won Georgia in November 2020 by the narrowest margin of any state, fewer than 12,000 votes. On the same election day, there were two Senate votes. Republican Senator David Perdue was facing a challenge from Democrat Jon Ossoff, and a special election for the seat vacated by retired Republican Johnny Isakson. Kelly Loeffler became the incumbent against Democrat Raphael Warnock. But none of those candidates received the required majority, so under state rules, two runoff elections were scheduled for January the 5th, 2021. Meanwhile, Donald Trump claimed, without evidence, that voter fraud had cost him the election, and he said Georgia's runoff would also be rigged.
And make sure your vote is counted. Make sure they don't let you say, I'm sorry, somebody else has already voted for you.
Well, that kind of backfired. Disgruntled Republicans stayed home, Trump made it all about him, and...
NBC News now projecting that Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, will win the Senate runoff in the state of Georgia.
This is breaking news. NBC News now projects Raphael Warnock as the winner in the special Georgia Senate election.
USA! USA! It was the very next day that a pro-Trump mob attacked the United States Capitol building, trying to stop the final certification of Joe Biden's victory. Now Senator Jon Ossoff still has another 4 years in his term, but as Warnock is technically serving out the remainder of Johnny Isakson's term, he's up for re-election in November. So, who is Senator Raphael Warnock? Well, probably the first thing to know is that he is a Christian minister.
It is the first day of the rest of your life. Go now to that place on our website that says, I want to join.
The 53-year-old became Georgia's first ever black senator last year, and, along with Ossoff, they are the first Democrats elected to the Senate from the state in 2 decades. Warnock has been the senior pastor at Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church since 2005, the pulpit once occupied by civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King.
Dr. King said, "History has thrust something upon me from which I cannot turn away."
Warnock is the father of 2 children with his now ex-wife, Ule, who's accused him of running over her foot during an argument.
I want to file a report.
I'm thinking she's clear, and I barely moved. And all of a sudden she's screaming that I ran over her foot.
A medical examiner found no sign of injury and no charges were laid, but the issue has not gone away.
So you do not want Walker running loose against your secondary.
Senator Warnock's Republican opponent is former footballer Herschel Walker, who was born in Georgia, played his college football there in the 1980s before 12 seasons with the NFL.
Newsom and Walker next to White. Snap is back, hand off Walker up the middle. 10, 5, touchdown, Herschel Walker!
Walker is now 60. He's a longtime friend of Donald Trump, who appointed him to his Presidential Commission on Sports and Fitness. Walker is also a businessman with a number of companies involved mostly with chicken products. And Herschel Walker was a vocal supporter of Donald Trump's false claims the 2020 election was stolen.
Part of Walker's appeal for Republicans who nominated him to run for the U.S. Senate was his potential to strip black voting strength away from Raphael Warnock. If Walker could sway enough black voters, he could win the Senate race.
But Herschel Walker is a very controversial candidate. Trump's backing helped him win the Republican nomination, but he still carries plenty of baggage, including allegations of domestic violence by his former wife.
Listen to what his ex-wife had to say about him.
His eyes would become very evil. The guns and knives. I got into a few choking things with him. The first time he held the gun to my head, he held the gun to my temple and said he was going to blow my brains out.
Herschel Walker has been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, and he blames that for behaviour including playing Russian roulette. Early in the campaign, it was revealed Walker actually has more children than previously acknowledged.
After initially admitting to having a child that was unknown to the public, it turns out Walker has 2 more children.
And this week, a report from the Daily Beast claimed that Walker, who says he opposes abortion in all cases, including pregnancies as a result of rape and incest, encouraged his girlfriend to get an abortion in 2009, which she did. He then reimbursed her for it and sent her a get well card. Walker denied the abortion claim and initially said that he didn't even know who was making the allegation. That was undercut 2 days later when she claimed to be the mother of one of his children, which Walker also wanted aborted. Making matters worse, Walker's son Christian then took to social media with a very blunt message for his father and any Conservatives thinking of voting for him.
He has 4 kids, 4 different women, wasn't in the house raising one of them. He was out having sex with other women. Do you care about family values? I'm just saying, don't lie. Don't lie on my mom, don't lie on me, don't lie on the lives you've destroyed and act like you're some moral family man. Y'all should care about that, conservatives.
Herschel Walker maintains it's all untrue.
What's your reaction to people so close to you? Your son, a mother of someone who says that she's the mother of your kids, saying that you're lying. What's your reaction to people so close to you, saying don't trust you?
Well, just like what I just said, the Democrats are desperate for this seat. This seat is important.
But
They're very desperate for this seat. I love my family. I always love my family. I'm going to win this race. I know I'm going to win this race and stuff.
I wouldn't say that denial was super convincing.
No, I'm not convinced.
No, especially given the Daily Beast is bringing the receipts. And I mean the actual receipts. They reckon they've seen the bank deposit receipt for his cheque for the abortion, including an image of the actual signed cheque. And this is how Walker explained that one away.
What about the $700 check? Is there anybody you can remember sending that much money to?
Well, I send money to a lot of people, and that's what's so funny. And let's go back to my part. You know, I do scholarship for kids. I give money to people all the time because I'm always helping people because I believe in being generous. God has blessed me, and I want to bless others.
Mm-hmm. If true, the hypocrisy on display here would be off the scale because, as John said before, Walker doesn't just oppose abortion, he supports no exceptions whatsoever. Not rape, not incest, not even the life of the mother. He describes those exceptions as excuses. And he says that this is not a recent view of his. He's always felt this way. So, if he really told this woman it would be more convenient for her to have an abortion because it was not the right time for him to have a child, then that would be a pretty poor effort. His son's fury is also tough for Republicans to dismiss because Christian Walker is a massive Trump fan. He's not a Democrat, and I'm not sure this kind of a response from an anonymous Republican official would sit well with anyone. They said that Christian was, quote, a deeply disturbed kid with obvious issues of his own, that he's a spoiled brat, and that he's solely to blame if Herschel Walker loses. For his part, Herschel Walker has put out this response ad, which to me seems fairly brazen.
Reverend Warnock's running a nasty, dishonest campaign. Perfect for Washington. The Reverend doesn't even tell my full story, my true story. As everyone knows, I had a real battle with mental health. Even wrote a book about it. And by the grace of God, I've overcome it. Warnock's a preacher who doesn't tell the truth. He doesn't even believe in redemption. I'm Herschel Walker, saved by grace.
So he claims to have repented, even though he won't confess to the indiscretion in question. He won't even say what the crime was. Instead, he attacks Warnock as a phony Christian because Warnock hasn't embraced his repentance for the action that he won't even admit he did. That is cheeky, but it might work because Republicans may well need Walker to win to take back the Senate. This was Talkback host Dana Lash.
Please keep in mind that I am concerned about one thing and one thing only at this point. So I don't care if Herschel Walker paid to abort endangered baby eagles. I want control of the Senate.
It's pretty blunt. And a solitary, very, very early tracking poll suggests that Dana Lash may not be alone. Insider Advantage had a poll out when the scandal broke. And the day before it broke, Warnock was beating Walker by 1 point. But after it broke, Warnock was only beating Walker by 3 points, which was still within the survey's margin of error. So, John, this race, believe it or not, might still be going down to the wire, even after all this.
It's all very reminiscent of Trump in 2016, isn't it, Chaz? Well, for more, Tia Mitchell is with us. She's the Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper. Tia, welcome to Planet America.
Thanks for having me.
I guess it shouldn't come as any great surprise to you that Herschel Walker seems to be taking a leaf out of his good friend Donald Trump's book. Deny everything, plough ahead, admit nothing. How's it working out for him?
Yeah, that's really the Trump playbook. And, for Republicans specifically, but I would argue just politicians in general, Trump created a playbook that they didn't know existed, which is you could arguably overcome very serious allegations that perhaps in the past would tank someone's political career. But that playbook is deny, attack the media, attack your enemies, and then that allows you to deflect any real accountability. Also, not just undermining the people who are making the case, but just never really addressing the specifics.
How common knowledge has this story been behind the scenes? Did you personally know about it before it broke?
I would say in general, a lot of people felt that there were more skeletons that would come out and that, as many, falsehoods, inaccurate statements, secrets such as the kids that he did not publicly acknowledge, for example, those things had already been trickling out. But the rumor has always been there's always more, there's going to be more. There are many things that could damage Herschel Walker potentially that could come to light. There's always been this skepticism of Herschel Walker and whether, his past could come and diminish his chances of winning.
This is really a political gift for the Democrat, Raphael Warnock. So how is he playing it this week?
We should note that, Senator Warnock has faced a domestic violence allegation himself. He went through a really messy divorce. But you will see Republicans saying, why is Herschel Walker being held to a different standard? Raphael Warnock has his own problems. And it's not necessarily apples and apples, but I think that's also a reason why you don't see Senator Warnock piling on, because it's inevitable that if he were to pile on and say, look at Herschel Walker, look at these bad things he's accused of, you can expect Republicans to say, now, wait a minute, you've been accused of some bad things too. And that's not something that Raphael Warnock wants to talk about, quite frankly.
How's Walker's son Christian being treated at the moment? I saw one Republican official referred to him as, quote, a spoilt brat. And it strikes me that he'd be quite vulnerable at the moment, given he just isolated himself from his entire MAGA support base.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Christian Walker, yes, he's an adult, but he's a young adult. He's 20 years old, I believe, maybe 21. And he is, one of the things that Herschel Walker and his supporters have said is, Democrats are using Christian Walker to push their anti-Herschel Walker agenda. But that's not who Christian Walker is. He is MAGA, far-right Republican. He is not someone who is aligned with Democrats, and it may not be smart for Republicans to criticize him too much because, again, he's a young person with a large social media following, and he's made it clear he will use his social media to speak out on his own behalf or to criticize his father. And I doubt they want to see much more of that.
So, Tia, what can and will Republicans do at this point? Is there any option to even get Herschel Walker off the ballot before November?
There is no option. Herschel Walker is their candidate, and he will be on the ballot in November. Early voting in Georgia starts October 17th. When you ask me what's next, to me, the biggest thing is Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock are scheduled for their one and only debate on October 14th. There's a lot of, it took a long time for them to agree to this debate. And now, people are crossing their fingers that it actually happens. Herschel Walker did say recently that he will be at that debate and debate Raphael Warnock. So there's a lot of curiosity about what that will look like, because again, you've noted that Herschel Walker hasn't been the best at articulating himself, answering questions directly, laying out a vision.
Finally, if Georgia does end up going to a runoff election in January or whatever, and the winner ends up taking the Senate, the winner of Georgia wins a whole lot, which party do you think that scenario would advantage?
Well, it's funny you say that. The runoff now would be in December, because after the 2020 election and the 2021 runoffs and all those Democratic successes in Georgia, the Republicans who control the state government changed the election laws. And one of the things they changed was to make that runoff period shorter. And so instead of an 8-week runoff, it's a 4-week runoff. So we're looking at the second Tuesday in December for that runoff election. But again, yes, it could be that, again, the balance of power in the U.S. Senate could come down to the runoffs in Georgia in December. I think, again, just like we saw in January 2021, if that's the case, you'll see so much money, so much attention put on Georgia, again, put on turnout, put on rallying up the base, getting the base of both parties to turn out, because that's, especially in a runoff, it's about getting people to show up again, getting them to take the time off their jobs, getting them, educated on what's at stake so that they show up one more time to cast the ballot. It'll be all about turnout.
Tia Mitchell, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us on Planet America.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
This week, President Biden announced that he would pardon thousands of Americans who've been convicted under federal law for the possession of marijuana. He called on governors to follow suit for those prosecuted under state laws. As President Biden pointed out in a Twitter video, these laws have been used unfairly to target minorities and have created barriers to housing, education and employment.
White and black and brown people use marijuana at similar rates. Black and brown people are arrested, prosecuted, and convicted at disproportionately higher rates.
And the President has also called for a review of the classification of marijuana as a Schedule 1 drug, putting it alongside heroin and LSD, and in a higher category than the synthetic opioid fentanyl, which kills about 50,000 Americans each year.
Too many lives have been upended because of our failed approach to marijuana. It's time that we right these wrongs.
19 states and the District of Columbia have already approved adult possession and consumption of marijuana, with partial legalisation in 8 other states. Importantly for the timing of this announcement, voters in Arkansas, Maryland, Missouri, North and South Dakota will all cast ballots next month on whether to allow adults to use marijuana recreationally in those states as well. And the polls are with Joe Biden. Last year, Pew found 60% of Americans think marijuana should be legal for medical and recreational use, while a further 31% say it should be legal but just for medical use, putting the no to marijuana altogether vote at under 10% in America today, Chaz.
That's a very small number. We shouldn't, though, overstate what just happened. While indeed 6,500 people convicted in federal court over the last 3 decades have just been pardoned, literally none of those people were still in prison. 0. Also, be fair, pardoning someone does wipe their criminal record. And as Biden noted, you said before, a criminal record can stop you getting employment, housing, or educational opportunities. So that is still something. Also, let's give Biden credit. He has come a long way. He was the only candidate in the 2020 Democratic primaries to not favour rescheduling marijuana. And now he's done it. Well, now he's trying to do it. And as recently as last year, he had a clean out of his staff for people who had smoked marijuana before, even in states where it was legal. So maybe his poll numbers have helped him see the light, John.
Yeah, maybe.
A bit cynical. By the way, on marijuana being a Schedule 1 drug, that's not because it's supposed to be as dangerous as heroin. That's what people think. It's because Schedule 1 is supposed to be for drugs that have no proven medical use. Now that sounds weird because medical marijuana exists, but to prove it works, you need FDA level evidence, and it's harder to conduct their research to get that evidence for a Schedule 1 drug because they restrict the supply. It involves a lot of hoop jumping, right? So hopefully that's a bit of a Gorgon knot that Biden has at least loosened a little bit.
Yeah, we'll see. This week's decision by OPEC plus oil exporting nations to cut supply and push prices back up could not have come at a worse time for Joe Biden and his Democrats. The cartel of nations led by Saudi Arabia says it will cut oil production by 2 million barrels per day. Although analysts say in reality it'll be probably less than half that because of existing production shortfalls.
That 2 million is not production. It's the capacities that were available or reported to be available. But then it turned out that Angola, Nigeria, and some of the others just don't have 1 million barrels of that too.
But either way, with the average price at the petrol pump below $4 a gallon nationally for the first time in months, the White House is trying to remind voters it's not entirely their fault.
You've said the president was responsible for gas prices coming down. Is the president responsible for gas prices going up?
So it's a lot more nuanced than that, right? There have been global challenges that we all have dealt with. There's been pandemic and there's been Putin's war. And Putin's war has increased gas prices at the pump.
And I suppose it is fair enough to blame Putin and the pandemic in part, Chaz, but when there is a 4 or a 5 or a 6 in front of the price of petrol in bright lights outside of every petrol station in America, it does send a very clear reminder about the broader inflationary situation in America.
It certainly does. And also, by the way, the petrol prices were going up 3 months before the invasion of Ukraine.
That's true.
Just a little thing. Also, as Pete Ducey hinted, it's a bit hard to distance yourself from petrol price hikes when you've previously taken credit for your actions being related to petrol prices falling. That happened repeatedly. The problem for Biden, though, is that this plays into a wider narrative. Back in 2019, Biden was talking tough about what he'd do to Saudi Arabia after the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
We were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
And yet, when petrol prices skyrocketed up, he was back ingratiating himself with the Saudis with displays like this.
President Biden was reluctant to make this visit, perhaps out of concern of images like this one. This fist bumping with MBS when he arrived after vowing to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state.
Kind of cringy, but worth it if it worked. Unfortunately, this week we saw for sure that Biden's visit did not work. And given those people have been working the phones with Saudi Arabia for months, many see this news this week as a deliberate insult. Some have drawn a comparison to 2020, when OPEC wanted to increase production, but Trump threatened that if they didn't cut production, he wouldn't be able to stop Congress from passing legislation to withdraw American military support. So Saudi Arabia backed down, unlike now. So this makes Biden look a little bit weak. Also a little bit desperate, because apparently his next step is to reduce sanctions on Venezuela, just so America can start pumping oil there. You can understand Biden's concern though. When the Biden administration began, the average national petrol price was $2.38 a gallon. Now it's $3.86 a gallon and heading up. And in Nevada, it's $5.51 a gallon. Why did I mention Nevada?
Why did you mention Nevada?
Great question. It happens to be the closest Senate race in the country. It is literally in the statistical tie there. So, super high petrol prices could easily determine who wins the Senate. Everything old is new again, and that particularly applies to the crime panic. According to Gallup, 80% of Americans are worried about crime, and 72% are dissatisfied with America's policies to reduce crime. I told you last week that amongst the key election issues, 67% of likely voters thought crime was very important, with 22% more people trusting Republicans to handle it. But the reality is a little more complicated than that. For instance, Third Way found that the 25 biggest Democratic-run cities employ 75% more police officers per capita than the 25 biggest Republican-run cities do. And the 25 biggest Democratic-run cities also spend 38% more on policing per capita, and they also increased their police budgets in the most recent budget cycle by slightly more than Republican-run cities did as well. Even more surprisingly, while people assume that crime waves are a big city issue, murder rates in rural America rose 25% in 2020 as well. That's the largest rural increase since 1999. So those numbers were very close to matching the rises observed in cities in 2020. Now, if 2020 is sounding pretty bad from those figures I just cited, well, you're right. There was a big spike in murders in 2020. You can see it there, admittedly, still at far lower levels than the 1990s. And as far as violent crime goes, there also was a spike in 2020, although a much smaller spike. But this is where it gets really complicated, because in 2021, the FBI changed the crime reporting system, and only about 65% of Americans live in a place that reported any data to the FBI last year. Only 52% live in places that reported a full 12 months of data. Neither New York or LA reported any data, and Chicago, Florida, and Phoenix's data was all very sketchy. But what did the FBI's incomplete data find? A 4% increase in murders in 2021, which was well within the margin of error of their estimate, a 1% drop in violent crime, with a margin of error between -12 and +11%, and a 4% drop in property crime, with a margin of error of, wait for it, between -38 and +50%. What's the point of even collecting stats like that? You certainly can't draw conclusions from them. Then there's 2022, which is even less conclusive. These are tracking figures direct from America's highest crime cities. They're the murder figures for so far this year compared to the same period last year. Chicago has gone down 17%. Los Angeles is steady. New York has gone down 13%. Most of them have gone down. See the green figures on the right there? They're the ones going down. But then Milwaukee and New Orleans in particular have gone up a lot. So what conclusions do you draw from all that? I've got no idea. All I know is that none of the nuance I just brought you will be on display during the election campaign.
For sure. Very rubbery figures, but perceptions are everything. And as far as Americans are concerned, they're confronting a high rate of crime. And it is certainly a major theme for Republicans in this election cycle in particular, even though it's important to note policing is mostly a local issue, so has very little to do with members of Congress in Washington anyway. But here's a pretty typical ad attacking Democrat Mandela Barnes, who's running for Senate in the state of Wisconsin.
Violent crime up across Wisconsin. Families nervous about their safety. Yet Mandela Barnes called for releasing half of Wisconsin's jailed inmates. That would mean releasing over 10,000 criminals right into our neighborhoods. 10,000 reasons your family would be in more danger.
The Crims are literally kidnapping your children live on camera. They're that brazen, John.
Somebody should have stopped him. A recent analysis found that Republicans have spent more than $21 million on ads about crime, more than on any other policy issue, while Democrats have tried to answer that with $17 million worth of ads defending their record on crime, although that is less than half of what Democrats spent on ads about abortion rights. For more, we spoke to Jeff Asher. He's one of America's leading analysts of crime data, and we asked him whether recent crime figures support those Republican claims that Democratic leadership leads to more crime.
In terms of 2020, there were maybe slight differences in the overall numbers, but the trend was the same. Murder was up in big cities, over 1 million people. It was up in cities of 10,000 or fewer people. It was up in suburbs. It was up in sort of rural counties. And it was definitely up in Biden counties, and it was up in Trump counties. So it really wasn't a political polarization issue. We tend to, I think of it as a political polarization issue because big cities are the places that produce the best data. And big cities tend to have Democratic mayors. They tend to have Democratic leadership. And so we're very much have that sort of survivorship bias where what we see is what we see because of that's where the data is available.
And you can see our full interview with Jeff Asher on Off the Planet on iView, YouTube and Facebook. But for now, that is all for another trip to Planet America. We'll have more for you here at the same time next week.
We'll see you in the Extra, where we'll have both interviews, plus we're going to be talking about Armageddon. But before we go, spare a thought for the Republican candidate for governor in Michigan, Tudor Dixon. Right now, Democrats are outspending her and the Republicans in ad spending $16.5 million to only $924,000. Thankfully, though, it's impossible to tell how low budget her TV ads are. Enjoy.
Hey, have you seen the TV ads with the governor talking about the great things she's done for Michigan?
She's a liar. Whitmer can say what she wants, but we live here. Just look around, man.
During COVID, Whitmer locked down businesses like the Owasso Barber and put one woman from Holland in jail. Oh, yeah.
3,000 restaurants closed. And she's pro-business?
Yeah, right.
And what about those higher gas and food prices?
Our schools were closed for almost 2 years. Poor kids.
Speaking of kids, Whitmer says she's gonna work like hell to keep killing babies.
And she put COVID patients in Graham's nursing home.
Graham died alone.
Okay, I'm voting for the other chick. What's her name?
Tudor Dixon.
Okay, let's roll.
Watch out for potholes. Whitmer never kept her promise to
Fix the damn roads.